Okay, cool. Yeah, you guys asked for the third talk, so here it goes. Um, yeah, I don't really have any slides, and I kind of put the notes for my talk together like on my way here. So, um, but anyway, I wanted to like talk about SwiftUI because it's like this new exciting thing that Apple has introduced, and there's actually more to that what may seem because with the introduction of SwiftUI, Apple is kind of officially moving away from like the Objective-C / Cocoa era to like this new Swift era. And this is actually something that happened before, like back in the 90s when, um, who knows what Carbon is actually? Cool. So Carbon is like this UI framework Apple would use like back in the 90s, which was like C-based and stuff. And in like late 90s, what happened is that, Apple acquired Next, which was, the company founded by Steve Jobs. That's how Steve Jobs got back to Apple. And they basically took over like all the like software technology of Next, which was like this Cocoa and Objective-C. And that's what kind of started like this Cocoa era that, had lasted up until now. I mean, it still lasts. And it was like back in 97, I believe. And what actually happened is that I think that Apple has officially sunsetted Carbon in 2012 when they migrated macOS to 64-bit and they would migrate like Carbon framework to 32. So they basically after like officially moving to like this Objective-C / Cocoa era, they still kept Carbon around for like 15 years. I think that Photoshop was like notoriously known for being like heavily Carbon based, so it's kind of what's interesting and what's going on. So I've seen a lot of people asking like on Twitter and stuff like should I if I want to like start doing iOS development, should I still learn UIKit or should I jump straight into SwiftUI? So yeah, I mean UIKit is like not going anywhere for like the following 15 years, I would suppose. So. Cool. So anyway, what's kind of interesting is that if you compare like Cocoa Touch and SwiftUI, let's briefly talk about like UIKit. There's a lot of things that I really don't like about UIKit, and I'm as I was kind of looking at SwiftUI, I'm kind of happy that Apple kind of seems to agree with me, and they kind of fix all that stuff in SwiftUI, which is nice. My issue number one is view controllers in UIKit. I think that view controllers suck. They like the worst, and they never should have introduced them. I think that the reason what are view controllers for? They like when someone wants to start, when someone like wants to newly jump into iOS development, they suddenly need to learn what the difference between like UI view and UI view control is. It's like super confusing. What's the difference between UI view? What's the difference between UI view controller? What's the difference between UI view hierarchy? What's the difference between UI view controller hierarchy? Why are there like UI view controllers in the first place? I think that the reason like UI view controllers were introduced was like way back in like the very early was because like way back in like the early days of iOS. I mean, when you have a view controller, there's this method, view did load, right? So back in like very early days of iOS, like there was this other method called view did unload. And what that was for is that the idea basically was that when you have a view controller and you like present a new view controller on top of that, they would unload the view of like the view controller that's not visible anymore to kind of free up like system resources and stuff like that. Or if the app goes background and if you would like pop back or display the original view control, view did load would actually be called again. So it's not like now where we kind of have this guarantee that view did load is like called only once during the life cycle of a view controller. But I believe it was like in iOS 4 on iOS 5 during the WWDC, Apple was like, yeah, we've actually done some measurements and this is useless. So we're deprecating view did unload. And I kind of personally think that since that's when like view controllers lost their purpose. because originally they were like this wrapper around UI view that could like go away and be recreated, and that's not the case anymore. And luckily in SwiftUI, there's just views. There's like no view controllers or nothing, like no unnecessary abstraction. Navigation control is called navigation view, and it's just, everything is a view, which is quite nice. Another big pain point is that Apple keeps preaching this, or like kept preaching this, model view control architecture. And when you have a look at view control, people are like, this is the controller where all the stuff is supposed to go, right? Yeah. So, obviously another issue is that UIKit was like all the views were originally built in a manner where like all the measurements and like layout of everything would be like fixed. That's why you have these frames and stuff, and all the like outer layout is kind of put on top of that, and that's kind of why you have this weird stuff such as, that translate outer resizing mask to constraints kind of thing. That's like my worst nightmare. I always forget to turn it off, and then, I wonder why like nothing shows up. And storyboards. I mean, people who know me, know that I hate storyboards. I hate it first, but I refuse to use it. I always refuse to use it. And really glad that Apple has finally kind of deprecated them, because when you create like a new SwiftUI thing, there's like no storyboards. I mean, there is one like for the like initial loading screen, but besides that, they like, just, write everything in code. I don't know, I feel like storyboards have always been a bad idea. That's like a thing that comes from the 90s, like late 90s to early 2000s. That was like the era where like these what you see is what you get editors were like a thing. But right now, I mean, what was happening is that, the internet happened, and there's a lot of people collaborating on a lot of things, and these storyboards are backed by some XML no one really understands, and you have like these merge conflicts and stuff like that. And I think that, for a very long time, we've been trying and failing to come up with something that's better than a plain text file. And we don't have anything. Still, like writing something in a plain text file is the best we have. If you have a look at the web, again, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was like this era of what you see is what you get editors, and they like moved away from that. And now when you write in React or whatever, everything is in code. And Apple is kind of catching up with that. Yeah, storyboards, like, I don't know. I mean, I've really tried to use it, and there's, the best you can do is to create like this weird wireframe. Sure, there's stuff like IB designable. I've really tried to use it, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. There's IB inspectable, which in my opinion is the best way to create runtime crashes, like very obscure runtime crashes in the end. Yeah, I've already mentioned merge conflicts. Yeah, so I'm really glad that Apple was like, Apple kind of, finally decided to sunset like any kind of visual editors for SwiftUI, and they like just write it in code. Regarding SwiftUI, I mean, when you have a look at SwiftUI, it's really nothing revolutionary. Apple has kind of, if you have a look like outside of Apple platform, like at React, it's the same thing. Apple is just catching up with, what the web guys have been doing for a very long time. But that's good, there's like, yeah, I already mentioned there's like no view controllers, which is nice. What's actually what I find super exciting is that Apple has finally managed to implement some kind of like methods whistling for Swift or like live reload, because when you're using SwiftUI and you change something, Apple basically takes like the definition of, what the method, you just edit it and it kind of replaces it at runtime without like recompiling the whole thing. That's actually something I'm, very interested in, and I actually want to have a look at, how this is like done under the hood, and just haven't done it yet. What I find being kind of a downside is that if you have a look at SwiftUI, Apple is doing a lot of very obscure stuff, like all those property wrappers that do like very weird stuff, such as you have that SwiftUI view, which is a struct, and you have like a property on that struct. And if you mark that struct as, what is it called, like a state or something, it kind of makes it a static property, which kind of persists between like, when you like recreate the instance of that struct, it kind of stays there, which is very strange, but that's how it works. So Apple is doing a lot of obscure stuff that you need to kind of relearn, but fine. I mean, from what I've seen from SwiftUI so far, I'm really excited. What I'm not so excited about is that, what do we do about like adoption of SwiftUI? Like, what do we do about moving from UIKit to SwiftUI? SwiftUI is obviously iOS 13 only. And if you're like one of the lucky ones who work for a company or work on an app that only supports like the latest 2 iOS versions, you guys can we can in theory like start using SwiftUI next year. The issue is that SwiftUI as it is now is pretty much unusable. It's like so full of bugs and fragile. And I'm pretty certain that the kind of SwiftUI that Apple is going to introduce during the next year's WWDC is going to be very different from what we have now. So I don't think that we'd be able to start using SwiftUI the next year, because it'd be like super painful. We would need to be like dealing with all the bugs that we already fixed, in the latest code base and stuff like that. And that's actually something I would like to compare to Swift. When Apple introduced Swift, it was, again, the first version of Swift was pretty much unusable. Swift 2 was finally in a state where people could start using it in production. And then was it Swift 3 or 4 where they did this huge rewrite and basically had to migrate everything? Was it Swift 3 or 4? 3, okay. And Swift 4 and 5 are finally kind of incremental updates. And I believe that the only way for Apple to Apple should do, and what was pretty cool is that what Apple would do is that they would bundle all the Swift libraries with your app. So every time they would release a new version of Swift, you would be able to use all the latest fixes and features right away, because you would bundle the whole thing with your app. And I believe that Apple really needs to start doing the same thing with SwiftUI, which is kind of an issue, because there's this SwiftUI, which is using Combine, which is using the latest version of Swift, which is now, which is not really being bundled with your app anymore, which I find stupid, because I would definitely prefer being able to use the latest Swift versions from, not having the Swift libraries in my app, which is 3 to 5 megabytes, which is nothing compared to the size of an average app, right? It doesn't really. And I actually believe that that's going to happen. I don't think if Apple is necessarily going to open source SwiftUI, but I believe that Apple is going to start backporting it to older versions of iOS, because that's the only way to get a decent adoption. That's for A. For B, this is exactly what Android is doing. Android is having this compatible library, so basically all the new stuff, at least from UI, they backport it to the latest X versions of Android. This is what the web devs are used to, because when there's some new thing, you basically just download the JavaScript on your website and you can start using it right away. And Apple really needs to catch up with that. And if that doesn't happen, yeah, I guess we can pretty much forget about SwiftUI for if that doesn't happen for the following 3 years or so, SwiftUI is only going to be this playground thing people are going to write tutorials about, but no one's really going to use it in production. And yeah, that's what I would like to leave you with.
I have a question. Do you know when Interface Builder was introduced?
I don't know. I started with iOS back on Xcode 3, and Xcode 3 already had it, so I don't know.
Yeah, okay. I heard something or read something like that. Interface Builder was actually introduced at Next. So
That's very possible.
80s, late 80s, probably. I just early 90s.
I just remember when I was
It's a really old thing.
Right. Yeah, I remember when I was 10 years old, I would play with this software called Borland C++ Builder. which was, I believe, the same company that was like developing Delphi, and they already had like this exactly the same thing as interface builder. So that's really not a new thing. And it should finally die because, as I said, we've been trying and failing to come with something better than like a plain, text file with source. And okay, cool.
Yeah, but that's not entirely true that they dropped the interface builder. They just integrated it in the way that they've got the code view and it generates the image preview. You can drag still elements onto the canvas and it builds just code. So you've got the interface builder on the right.
But that's not really something you can like.
You don't have multiple screens. You have one screen.
Right, but you mean like the SwiftUI preview on the right side?
Pretty much. But you can. It's interactive. It's not just a preview. You can click on it. You can set attributes to that. So you can drag from library elements into that.
Right, you can like on the right side. Yeah. Okay, cool.
So they just evolved to the state that you can use either one, and you just have.
I know that they just kind of improved like the code editor, so you can like have like fancy stuff, all those like fancy menus on the left side. I don't know. When I was playing with it, I was kind of clicking on the like preview, and it was doing nothing. So I need to try again, I guess.
Maybe like the functional is, but they're coming soon. So you can do your own implementation of these things if you want. It's fine, you can like recreate it. It's possible. So that's what I don't agree with.
Oh yeah, totally.
Features you can't use or something.
Right. Now, don't get me wrong. I do love those what is called property wrappers. I totally love those, and I'm about to like open up a request on. I'm using reactive Swift, and unless like someone manages to do it before me, I want to open up a request to add like property wrappers for stuff like reactive Swift properties. So instead of like wrapping, like that, I just you can just mark it as add observable or whatever. That's what but yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, you have like a standard Swift property and you add that property wrapper in front of that, and suddenly like you totally change the way it behaves, and what I don't like though is there's like this, what is it called? Like there's like one property wrapper and which is kind of like a shared storage, like a state or something like that. And it kind of expects that you define the way you want to pull from that before you actually use it. And if you don't, it crashes, which, well, on one hand, I'm not really saying that I can think of a better way to do it, but I think that it's one of the things that Apple's going to change, like for SwiftUI 2 or whatever it's going to be called, because it's kind of, I don't know, you're kind of losing these compile time guarantees, which is, always nice to have.
I doubt that Apple will allow us to rebundle older versions of SwiftUI to older systems, new versions of SwiftUI to older systems, because according to what I know, what I heard, they will prevent us from modeling new versions of Swift to older systems.
Right.
Since the runtime will be loaded from the system. So I think the situation will get worse, not better.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the way I see it, imagine that, Apple weren't bundling like Swift with the app, and suddenly, Swift 3 would come up and you would need to wait for like 2 years to finally, like migrate to Swift 3, and it's kind of ridiculous. And I feel like we're like in exactly the same scenario. So yeah, I'm kind of just secretly hoping that Apple's going to do something about it and that they're going to stop backporting. Because as I said, Android's doing this, and it's kind of the same thing on the web. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Well, I had to wait for my Mac for 4 years.
Okay.
reveal thing.
Yeah. By the way, I kind of purposely decided to like put together a shit talk. I put together in like 5 minutes to kind of lower the bar. So if you guys want to, give a talk, so you're not afraid to. Okay. Any other questions? Feel free to like continue the discussion with me. I'm just gonna, step off the stage and just. Okay.